be a wedge in our industry, right? And the people that aren't adopting it and learning how to properly service their clients, they're going to get wedged out, right? It's be every single client of ours and prospect wants to talk about AI, right? I think it's in every industry, it's in every conversation, right? They're getting bombarded with it in their personal lives and in their industry, right? It is the thing to talk about. You're still talking about speeds and feeds and cybersecurity.
Yep.
Not saying those aren't important,
Yeah.
but you're going to get left behind, right? Because somebody else is going to come in talking about how AI can transform their business. They're going to get their ear, right?
Welcome back to the MSP Pipeline. I'm your host, Kyle First, and today's guest is Allan Jocson, former CEO and now CIO of Agilitech IT. You know, Allan's story is incredible. He moved from Asia, starting building computers as a kid, launched an MSP in 2007, while also building a global recruiting operation in the Philippines. And today, he helps organizations rethink IT, cybersecurity, AI. And today we're going to dive deeper into talking about growth, sales, leadership, surviving adversity, and why Allan believes the traditional MSP model is rapidly changing. Allan, welcome, thank you so much for being here on the MSP Pipeline today.
Thank you so much, Kyle. Excited to be here.
Good. Glad to hear that, Allan. You know, you were building servers, working in data centers long before Agilitech. What was it about technology that hooked you on early?
You know, I think I was just born into it, right? Father was a computer programmer and ran his own servers for his college in the 1970s. It's a big tape reel machine, so I was born with a computer in my hand, if you would say, right? And I just naturally gravitated toward them. And we're building things on Commodore 64s and
Yep.
Yeah, as far back as I can remember, that's just what I enjoyed. Yeah.
Of course. And I love that you have that drive in you, right? So, you know, before becoming an entrepreneur, what did your career actually look like?
You know, before I actually started a business, I was always dabbling in businesses anyway, right? From paper routes to selling services, right? From shoveling snow and you know, I think it was IT consulting, right, in the early days and dot-com boom, and I was setting up infrastructure. So it was training to be an MSP in a way without knowing it.
Yeah, definitely. And what was there a specific moment when you realized you wanted to build your own company instead of working for someone else?
Yeah, I mean, you know, IT consulting, I was more of an independent contractor, right? I didn't have any employees and you know, it came up during the dot-com boom in the Bay Area. After moving to Las Vegas, dabbled in a few corporate jobs, right? Casinos and banks, and identified that just wasn't my path, right? And you know, I wanted to forge my own way. And so I think that was the tipping point, if you will. I'm not the best employee, I would say, right? I'm better. You know, I have problems with authority, let's just say. And so I wanted to blaze my own way and create my own path.
Definitely. You know, when Agilitech launched in 2007, you know, everyone has those struggles in those early years, but what did those first years actually look like for you?
I'd say when we first started, right, I was extremely technical, right? I started it with a partner at the time, and we were just focused on doing great technical work, right? Servicing small businesses, essentially being an outsourced IT provider. The MSP moniker wasn't even a huge thing, right? I don't think everybody was calling themselves MSPs in 2007, and it was a mix of break fix and block hours, but it was proactive maintenance contracts, so very applicable to what MSP model is. And so, you know, I think early on it was just doing good technical work, right? We were both technical operators. And, you know, that allowed us to grow in the initial days, right? Is we were really good at what we did, took care of our clients, took care of their infrastructure, because that's what it was back then. Setting up servers internal, right? For their email even. This is when people used to host email, right? Remember back in the dark ages when you actually hosted your own email. It seems like forever ago, but that's what companies did, right? Internal.
Yeah. Of course, you know, a lot of MSP owners talk about that first client you get, right? But do you remember that moment when the business felt like it's not just a side project anymore?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were lucky enough to where we were already dabbling, and when we left our corporate jobs, we already had side gigs, right? My partner and I were actually working for the same company, right? And we had already started that entrepreneurial spirit, and so we had, I think it was when we started the company, when we started Agilitech, we had 3 side gigs going where we were already supporting a few different companies. But I think that tipping point, right? It wasn't necessarily the first client. It was making that decision to leave our full-time jobs and go, can we take this leap, right? Because I think when you start a business, that's the biggest decision, right? It's never smooth from the get-go, and you're willing to forego the payroll, right? The steady paycheck for an opportunity, right? And have faith in yourself that you can make it, and make it happen, right? It's kind of blind trust, right, in your own capabilities. And so I think that's the tipping point, right? I think for all business owners and people who start businesses is, can I make that leap, right? And it happens throughout your business life, right? Where you're gonna, the path is not always clear, but you have to have enough faith that that is the right solution, that is the right path, and you're gonna go.
Definitely. I mean, it's definitely a big leap, but in those early years, did you have any of those humongous mistakes that you wish you could have
Mm.
changed?
Yeah, I could probably build a book on the mistakes I've made throughout the time, right? But if you don't, I have a firm belief in business. If you don't take risks, and calculated risks at that, right? If you don't, you're never really going to progress, right? And the key is learning from those mistakes, right? But I'd say mistakes early on, wrong hires, bad financials, right, and not enough financial acumen on how to solve those mistakes, right? Trusting other people with running your own finances, right? When ultimately, as a business owner, you have to have capability in all of the domains of your business, right? I don't think you can run a proper business and scale it if you don't at least have a good understanding of all of the domains, right? And I think that's the difference between being a business owner and being a technician. And again, early on, technical focus, right? Great at tech, didn't know that much about finance, didn't know that much about sales, hiring, managing people, right? Those are all aspects that have nothing to do with being a technician, right?
Definitely. Many founders underestimate how much entrepreneurship is sales. So how did you actually learn that side of the business?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, honestly, you can't really run a business without sales, right? Like that is a key piece, right? Is you will never grow until you learn how to sell, right? Referrals, and that's what you survive on in the early days. I think that's true for everybody in this industry. Is initially you're doing a good job technically, people refer you, that's great, right? But eventually those referrals slow down, right? And it's not intentional, it's not calculate, you can't calculate, right? Referrals, there's no pipeline there, right?
Yep.
It's just
Pipeline.
reactive, right? You hope, and it's nice when it happens, right? But there's nothing you can do to make it happen. So I think sales ultimately is a mindset, right? And to have a focus on it, right? And it's training, it's learning, it's not being afraid of it, right? And it's I think I went through several boot camps, read a ton of books, and ultimately just became interested in how to sell, right? And not being resistant to it. I think that's a challenge in our industry, is a lot of people view sales as a dirty word, right? And ultimately it's not, right? You're running a business, and if you want to scale that business and you want to bring in better clients and the right kind of clients, then sales has to be treated just like your technical work, right? And and developed and grown and scaled ultimately for the type of organization you're running.
Yeah, definitely. I'm not sure if I recall or not in our initial conversation, if you were in sales, if you were, doing the whole sales process when you started, or did you actually just naturally get into it as longer as you built the company up?
Yeah, no, I had zero sales process when we started, right? Outside of being friendly, right? And naturally not being extremely introverted, right?
Mhm.
My partner was the introvert. I was I didn't mind talking to people, right? That's how I grew up. Had being, I think, life story being moved around, right? Every 2 to 4 years, I learned how to talk to people, right? And I had to survive. And I think that was an innate, skill that I learned growing up, right? Now, that's not necessarily applicable to everybody, but if you're not able to talk to people, which is key for sales ultimately, right? You can't just hide behind a keyboard and blast emails and expect sales to happen, right? There has to be somebody that engages on a human to human aspect with prospects, right? I think that's what closes a sale, right? Is the know, like, trust, right? You have to develop some trust in there. And so when I started, there was certainly no sales process, if you will. I was winging it, right? And figuring out what worked, right? I did a lot of networking. I think that was my initial sales process, if you will, is like, let me just go meet people. Where are business owners that potentially are prospects, right? And so, a lot of learning and growing, and sales process matured over time, right? I mean, Agilitec's 19 years old, right? A little over 19 years old now. And yeah, there's certainly been, again, a lot of growth, a lot of change in how I approach sales over time.
I mean, why do you think so many MSP owners avoid sales early on when they start the business?
I think a lot of MSP owners probably are very similar, right? In that we came up through technical ranks, right?
Mm-hmm.
We, very few that I talk to, right? I don't know the percentages, right? But I'm in enough IT peer groups, MSP peer groups over the last 10 plus years that, yeah, most of us are technical, right? And I think, technical people typically are lean toward the introverted side, right? We prefer to talk to a computer than, to network with humans, right? And I think that's a big barrier, right, to growth, obviously, right? Because it goes back to what I had what I referred to earlier, right? If you don't interact and talk to other humans, right, maybe you'll have a lead funnel, right, getting people in through Google Ads, et cetera. And I think that's where a lot of technical founders get stuck, right? They overanalyze that aspect, right, and want to sit behind the computer and figure out a system to bring in leads without interacting with people, right, and without having the ability to have that conversation. I think that's where people get stuck ultimately, and looking at sales as a dirty word, right? I think that's prevalent in our industry, where you're like, oh, I'll just hire a salesperson, right? That's going to sell.
Yeah.
Without having any knowledge of this person's not going to have any idea how to sell you, how to sell your company, how to sell your services, if you have zero baseline, zero process, zero training for them to be effective, right? And I could tell you, a number of stories of bad sales hires, right? Because that was my mentality. Not necessarily sales is a dirty word, but that I could just hire a salesperson and they should just go sell, right? Because that's what you do. That's what a salesperson does, right? But until you have, if you don't know who your ICP is and how to, what processes there are you not giving them leads? Are they a hunter? Are they a farmer? Are they, a closer, right? Like it's what kind of salesperson are you hiring? I think that's the learning lesson, I've had early on.
Of course, yeah. I mean, now you changed. You didn't do the whole sales process, and now you do. But what changed your mindset about that? Like, is there something that convinced you to get into sales? How did it work for you?
I don't think there was a one thing, right? I think, I think as, over time, as I've run my business, there's different focus points, right? Depending on what the pain point was in my business, right? At some point I knew I had to transition from being the best technical person in the company to, once there's some growth, right? Because I think when you're super small, you're wearing all of the hats, right? And so you can't do everything 100%, right? Like you can do technical work. Okay, I have to do some sales. I have to do some potential HR because I have to hire a new tech. You're basically doing everything in the company, doing the finance, right? I know a lot of owners still do their own books, right? Then you start filling in those gaps of what you're not great at, right? I'm a big believer in focusing on what you love to do and what you're really good at, right? Everything else you need to hire to fill in the gaps eventually, right?
You
Because
say you learned about like building a predictable pipeline. How did you learn about that?
yeah, I think building a predictable pipeline, was born out of need, right? Is without having leads to go after, right? Then you really have no ability to build a system, right? Because ultimately, sales to me is repeatability, right? Is a system that you don't just wing it, right? You don't just try a few things for a few weeks, a month, even 2 months, even, and hope and pray, right, that something's going to happen, and so I think that's the big thing I've learned in sales is there has to be some sort of system, right, and it can be improved over time just like any system, but without a pipeline and understanding of how you get leads into the top of the funnel, right, how are you going to properly nurture them, right, if they're not ready to buy at that time, because the amount of people that are realistically ready to buy is a small percentage, right? And I think that's where a lot of people give up is oh, I tried email marketing, oh, I tried Google ads, oh, I tried networking, right? And yeah, you have to keep trying different aspects, because I think different people sell differently, right? Different MSPs have different ways of selling, right? And there's really no one way that I would say you have to sell, right? But you have to identify what works for your company, right? What we identified is we're best in networking events, right? Throwing our own events, being in rooms with other business owners, right? And again, it goes back to my networking, right? And working with strategic partners ultimately to fill the top of funnel for us. I think that's what works for us, right? I don't focus as much on the email marketing. I don't focus as much on the cold calling, but I know several large MSPs that's how they grew, right? Is cold calling, email nurturing, right? And closing. So again, systems, focusing on systems, seeing what works, tweaking it, and executing across it.
Definitely. I mean, everyone has their own different process about going things, right? So let's say if someone started an MSP tomorrow, where should they even start?
With sales, I mean, honestly, or starting an MSP, or are you talking about sales specifically? Yeah, sales. I mean, I'm a big believer is until you're about 2 million in revenue, owner-led sales is still the best, right? You as the owner, regardless if you're technical only in your head, right, are still the best person to sell and ultimately close, right? You can outsource different aspects such as the initial lead gen, right? The marketing that leads to sales opportunities, those kind of things. But when it comes time to have that owner to owner conversation, right? Because typically when you're smaller, you're focusing on smaller businesses, right? That's usually the best niche for most MSPs, right? And as you grow, the bigger companies, you can go after bigger companies, the bigger you are, right? But it doesn't make sense for, let's say, a 5-person company to go after a client that's 500 users, right? It's the size isn't correct, right? So typically when you're smaller, you're talking owner to owner, right? You're typically talking to the founder of the other company, and that holds a lot more weight than hiring a junior salesperson, right, to go talk to this business owner. Good luck on getting the meeting, right? Whereas I found early on, people would talk to me as a fellow business owner, right? Especially in these networking events, right? There's a different conversation that happens. So to me, that is really where you get started is, focus on sales, learn some sales chops, learn what works, right? If you don't like slimy salesperson, then don't be a slimy salesperson, right? It doesn't have to be like that, and I think going back to what I initially said about learning all of the domains, you have to be competent as a business owner in all of these domains. You don't have to be the expert, right? But until you have an understanding, at least a baseline understanding of every part of your company and how to run it, you can't make appropriate hires to then replace yourself in that aspect, right? So if you don't love sales, that's okay, right? Just like if you don't love finance, that's okay, but you need to know enough to be competent. Enough. The old saying, right? You know enough to be dangerous. I think that's what you have to be in all aspects, including sales, right? And I don't I don't mind sales, right, at this point, right? And I couldn't say that when I first started, right? It's not like I loved it, right? But I love the aspect of having conversations, providing value, right? Helping another business owner or a company with their company ultimately, right? And that's how I look at the sales opportunity is we get to help other people. And when you look at it that way, it's not, it's not just purely revenue driven, right? It eventually just becomes that's what we do, right? We help companies. So
yeah, man, it's amazing. And you know, in the beginning of this pod, you talked about bad hires, right? But the one thing unique about your story is building recruiting capabilities and hiring talent globally, especially in the Philippines. So how did that opportunity even come about in the first place?
Yeah, I didn't set out with the idea of building a recruiting company, right? Agilitech is based in Las Vegas, Nevada, right? And I think most people know Las Vegas, right? It's a 24/7 town. And it doesn't sleep, right? And so a lot of our clients were 24/7 operations. And I think as we scaled, we started hiring bigger and bigger, we signed bigger and bigger clients. And eventually those phones started ringing, right? Those tickets started coming in at 3 a.m., 4 a.m. My technicians were on call at the time and were not happy, right? And, especially after we signed a large client, right? That was in the ultra high-end fine dining, and some of their restaurants in Vegas wouldn't close until, 5 a.m. if they closed at all. The few were 24/7, right? And luck we have it, the Wi-Fi would go down at 3 a.m. or the POS system, right? We didn't directly to support the POS, but we would support the infrastructure. So that led to me going, okay, well, I need to have a 24/7, a true 24/7 operation. Where in the world can I hire that, right? Or, can I hire that locally? And that's difficult, right? To have anybody work graveyard shift, if you will. And so I looked initially at, okay, well, I'm Filipino. The Philippines would probably work, right? In terms of somebody answer the phone. Can somebody just pick up the phone, answer the question? I don't need them to do technical work, right? Was my initial thought. And that's initially how it started. I just started hiring people to answer the phones, maybe create a ticket and call down the phone tree, and then that certainly morphed into, oh, well, why don't we do some technical work, right? And found, awesome technicians, right? And eventually built it from there, right? And, eventually had people working in all aspects of the business, right? From finance to project management, really. It wasn't just reactive support. It wasn't just help desk, if you will, or answering phones. That then transitioned near the pandemic, right? Or at the time of pandemic, if everybody remembers that, business shut down everywhere, right? Everything had to go remote. I was already operating fully remote, right? Again, started hiring in 2017. So we were already a well-run remote operation. We didn't slow down. We got busy during the pandemic helping other companies operate remotely, right? Yeah. And so we actually grew through the pandemic. I lost a big chunk of revenue, right? Initially, because I had a lot of restaurant clients, but then we ended up growing. I had other peers, right? I remember I mentioned that we were in a peer group. I had other peers reach out and go, hey, we need to set up remotely, right? Because we're shut down here as well. And I know you have a lot of people in the Philippines. Can you help me hire some people in the Philippines? And I was like, absolutely, man. Absolutely. Right. And, at the time we already had a recruiter, right? Working internally for us, trying to find talent. And I think after 3 companies I helped, one of my peers was just like, you really should just start a company, right? He's like, the service is good and you're able to find us some great technicians. And I was like, you know what? You're right. I probably should just start the other company. Yeah. So that's how Hierarchy was born. And we just kind of took off from there. And I treated it as a side project for several years, right? And was just looking at it as let me just help other MSPs. That was our main focus at the time. I know how to hire good technical people, good project managers, even executive assistants, right? Financial people. But, and then that side just branched out. And so we just helped build teams in the Philippines for companies effectively.
That's amazing. And I'm glad to hear that other companies are happy with your work as well. But, for some of those MSPs out there struggling to hire, what are they possibly missing?
Yeah, going back to that, you need to learn how to be good at all aspects. Hiring is a skill, right? And something that needs intentionality and focus, and you have to get better at it, right? And I ended up reading a lot of books, going through different seminars, right? I believe heavily in a system called top grading, right? There's some books around it. Again, learning how to properly hire, right? How to properly recruit. That's a skill. That's something that needs to be nurtured. And in the end, finding people aligned with your culture, I think, is the biggest thing, right? Not just a personal culture, your company's culture. I think that's the biggest thing. And initially, I'd say early on, I think the challenge is a lot of technical founders don't want to hire people smarter than them, right? I think there's an ego thing there, and go, oh well, I'm just going to hire some other people, but I'm going to be the top dog, right? And that mentality, I think, will limit you in all ways, right? I'm always looking to hire. I never want to be the smartest person in the room, right? Especially in my own company, especially in all domains, right? If you're wearing all of the hats, you can't be the best in all aspects, right? And you have to pick your lane. Again, going back to that highest and best use, and you have to know what you love and what you're great at, and hire around you. And I think that's the biggest lesson early on is, everybody's different. So you need to understand where your lane is, and then your first hire should be people that are not like you, right? That are better than you in whatever aspect you want to hire into, whether it's finance, sales, operations. If you're not the process guy, hire a process guy or gal, right? It's that's, I think, the growth path that's got to be different for everybody, because everybody's different, every owner's different, but that's typically the way. And if I went back to my earlier conversation about owner-led sales, I'd say don't make that your first hire, ultimately, right? It can't be a salesperson initially, and that's where a lot of IT business owners that I've seen in the industry make a mistake, right? You go, oh, I want to stay technical, so I'm just going to hire a salesperson to sell. That you're just going to waste money, until you understand and have a sales process and have understanding of systems. That's not the best first hire, right? And in the end, if you're the one still turning the screws and twisting knobs, pushing buttons, and being being the main technical person in your company, you're not running your company either, right? You're doing the technical work. So there's a progression there, and you eventually need to start working your way out of your own job, right? I think that's the mentality, is like, okay, what is the weakest point in my company right now, right? Because of me or because of the team I have, and that should be your next hire, right? That's how you kind of scale and figure it out strategically as you grow, because it changes over time. It changes based on the size of your company significantly. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, company gets bigger, you gotta put more weight on some other people instead of just yourself, right? So
yeah. I mean, that's how to get out of the day-to-day, honestly, right? That's the dream. I think if you want to be a true business owner, right, is to be, I think there's an old adage of like, you have to be able to go on vacation. I don't know how many business owners I talk to, especially early MSP founders, that they don't take vacations. And I remember those days, man. It's I traveled with a laptop, internet connection. It wasn't the best for my relationship with my wife, let's just say, because even when you're on vacation, you're never really on vacation because you're constantly putting out fires, right? And that's not that should never be permanent, right? And I understand earlier on in the days you have to do that, but eventually, a big goal should be to where you can go on vacation for a few weeks, a month even, right? And imagine that, right? Can you go on vacation for a month, not check any emails, and the thing is still running when you get back? And hopefully it's even better when you come back. Now you've got a real business, and you don't have just a job that you own, right? You don't own a job, you own a business at that point.
Yeah. Do that. I mean, speaking about Agilitech, right? So I understand that you no longer think of strictly as an MSP, right? You refer to it as a managed intelligence provider. So for someone who might not know what that means, if you can just briefly explain that.
Yeah. And it's a moniker that's come out in the last, couple of years, right? There's the transition because of AI, right? Artificial intelligence, right? Managed intelligence, managed services provider, right? connotates a certain aspect, right? Where we're focused on services, right? We're focused on providing outsourced services for companies, right? Infrastructure, cybersecurity. Well, what I always say, keep the lights on, right? Keep the blinky lights on, keep the infrastructure up and running, and keep them safe, right? Cybersecurity, right? That was, our services model, right? End user support, obviously. That's certainly transitioned over the last several years, right? And is going to exponentially increase into the future, where the model for MSPs or MIPs, right, is what they're starting to be called, is to provide that intelligence layer to our companies, right? What all companies need, want, are asking for, are clamoring for is guidance in this AI world, right? They want to leverage technology as a true business advantage, right? They want, for the first time, IT is now being perceived, right, or technology is perceived as a revenue driver, right, not as a cost center. That's a huge shift. And so I think the MIPs, or intelligence providers of the future, are still going to do the cybersecurity, still do the infrastructure, but those are table stakes at this point, right?
Yeah.
Like, everybody does that. That's great. What's your differentiator is, can you be an actual revenue driver for the companies? Can you help them disrupt their own industry? Can you help them prevent from being disrupted, right? Because that's what I think everybody's seeing, what everybody needs to, at least have an eye on, right? And when I say everybody, business owners, right, of all aspects, right? Is their industry going to get decimated by AI, right? Is it, are there competitors that are going to come in, right? Maybe their industry's not getting decimated, but is a AI-enabled competitor going to come in, right? Let's say you run a CPA firm, right? And tax prep. That's a industry ripe for disruption, right? Is because there's a lot of that. If you manage the intelligence layer appropriately, you can create massive efficiencies, speed of execution, right? With a very small team, you could disrupt a 40, 50 person CPA firm, right? With properly leveraging intelligence, right? And I think that's where managed intelligence needs to focus and needs to look at. And it's a different skill set, right? Because it changes the way you meet with the clients. It changes the conversation you're having, right? You have to have a different mindset, different employees ultimately, right? In order to be able to serve that. Because in my opinion, you need to have people that understand business and technology to have that, AI conversation, that intelligence conversation, right? At least that's the way we look at it, right? Is it shifts it over a little bit in terms of having conversations around, how many tickets did you close this month? How many, threats did you stop, right? From a cybersecurity perspective, right? How much downtime did you have? Oh, what are we looking at in the future used to be, what computers do we need to replace, right? Are there any apps we need to install, or manage, and it was just kind of managing this beast that the company didn't want to manage, right? The computer, the IT, the infrastructure, and user support. Now it's a completely different conversation where you really need to be a business ally to your clients, right? And understand their business strategy, how they're looking to leverage technology. Because to me, a good managed intelligence provider, it's a partnership with the client. You as the provider can't dictate what technology or what AI solutions are going to work for the company. They're the ones that know their company best, but they need our technical acumen and ability and understanding of how to securely implement AI solutions, automations, those kind of business improvement aspects. So to me, that's where the managed intelligence provider lives.
Of course. How do you think AI is actually changing the way your clients are operating today?
I mean, it's exponential, right? It's all aspects. I think ultimately, we looked internal, and I think the first step for a lot of companies, right, is be customer zero, right? Is, how does AI help my own company, right? And are we leveraging AI appropriately within our own firm, right? Not letting AI make all of the decisions, right? I think that's the mistake a lot of people make, right? Is it's still growing, it's still improving, still makes mistakes.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? And so we certainly started with leveraging AI within our own firm, just so that we grew the expertise internally. We knew it was actually working. We're continuously testing and improving our own systems. But then we shifted to helping our clients, right? And again, typically it's help clients with their own operational efficiency within their own firm, whether it's through sales, finance, administrative, all aspects, right? Wherever their bottlenecks are, right? And we work heavily on what are the best use cases per department within their own company. I think that's the first starting point. But looking further, right, is helping our clients serve their clients, right? If they're in a service-based industry, right, is how can you help your clients, right? Ultimately, can AI help you? And so you always want to have kind of a through view and not just a myopic view on just their company, right? Because again, you want to be that business partner, right? And so example is let's use a CPA firm, right? Is how does a CPA firm create efficiencies in their own firm, leveraging technology, leveraging AI to better serve their clients, right? And I'm not saying be in the face, right? Because I think in my opinion, AI of the future is going to be invisible to most people, right? The best AI, right, is to when I say people, I mean the employees in the company. Right? I don't think everybody in all companies should be AI experts. I don't believe that. I don't think everybody in the company, all employees should be playing with AI ultimately, especially in their own company. In their personal life, that's the different story, right? But I think it's a mistake I see a lot of companies go is we're going to deploy AI adoption throughout our entire company. We're going to give everybody access to these licenses and to these chatbots, use as many tokens as possible. Well, you're arming a bunch of people that have no idea what they're doing with building AI, right? Is you're asking effectively for them to be technologists, to be developers. That creates a massive amount of distraction. And so that's how, that's the main thing we focus on with our clients is, building a strike team, if you will, right? Building a transformation champion within their own company, right? Depending on size, sometimes it's one person that knows their entire environment, right? Knows the different departments, knows the people, there's some trust. That's the transformation champion within the client's company. We then provide ourselves as the AI engineer, head of AI, whatever you want to call it, right? Chief AI officer, right? Whatever the moniker is it's a partnership, and we can help them understand the need and guide them toward AI solutions that make sense for their company and deploy them in the background, if you will, to help the rest of their company, right? I think that's the path of how we help our clients.
Definitely, AI is big topic, right? Everyone talks about it nowadays, but what opportunities do you think if MSPs have over the next few years, if they embrace AI correctly, what are the opportunities?
I mean, it's exponential, right? I think it's the biggest technology change I've seen in my career, and I've been in technology professionally, right? Remember, I've lived it my entire life, but let's just say once I started actually charging people for money, it was 1991, right? So a long time, right? And I've never seen a change this fast, this big, this broad, right? So I think that's the opportunity, right? Is there overhype? Absolutely, right? That happens with anything, right? But is it real? Yeah, right? Unfortunately, I still see people in our industry push back and go, it's just another hype. It's just another bubble. It's fake, right? I would hope that your listeners don't think that way, right? No, don't do that. Don't do that, because our industry is ripe for disruption as well, right? In different aspects. And I'm not saying replace your entire level 1 help desk with AI, right? But again, it's another thing to tackle as an owner, right? If you're an owner on this call, it's like you have to dig in, right? Or somebody on your team has to dig in and innovate, right? And always stay on top of what's new, what's better, because things are changing, on a daily basis, right? Ultimately, right? It's hour by hour, right? So our outlook has changed significantly in terms of AI. It's like we used to have a 10-year outlook, right? As a BHAG, right? Going to 5 years. I don't know what's going to happen in 10 years, ultimately, right? I don't even look at that far anymore in terms of the AI world, right? No, right? It's just going to be completely different, right? And so it's actually shortened our outlook on what's viable, what's realistic, right? I think 3 years is even a long time. Right. So really focused on what's going to happen in the next year with AI, right? We're kind of, projecting into the future a little bit and seeing where it can effectively be used, right? Because we don't want it to be a distraction either, but like what's coming up, right? What's on the roadmap for these different firms, which I don't think they even know, right? Like again, it's as these models get more capable and effective, then it moves the goalpost a little bit about what's realistic, right? And all of a sudden, what you didn't think was viable, right, is all of a sudden realistic and viable, right? And so we owe it to our clients, we owe it to our company to be at that bleeding edge, right? And understand what's viable for them, what's viable for us, and implementing those things. So, again, what does the AI future hold? I have no idea, but we're gonna stay in front of the wave is how I would look at it, right? This is a big AI wave coming.
Yeah.
And I want to be in front of it. I don't want to be smashed by that wave, right? It's like, yeah.
I respect that answer very much, Allan. I want to get back to talk a little bit more about yourself, right? You've gone from CEO to CIO and a mentor now. So how would you say your definition of success has changed over the years?
Right. And just to clarify that title, CIO, right? Because it used to mean Chief Information Officer, right? The title we came up with, and that's truly what we did, is we came up with the title, right? Because what are titles anyway, right? These are all made up things anyway, right? I'm seeing some crazy titles these days, but from people. But anyway, I thought that matched more with what my role is in the company, right? So yeah, certainly I was CEO for 18 years, right? And I think we made this shift in about 4 months ago, where I'm a chief intelligence officer, right? And so, again, changing roles in the company, right? I went from managing the entire organization and the department heads for the different organizations to going, you know what? I need to own this progression into the future, right? This is the stuff I'm good at and I love to do, right? This is where I started to shift myself and went, I want to lead this AI progression, right? This intelligence journey for the company, for the future, for our clients. And I want to 100% focus on that. And you can't do that as a CEO, right? And so my main thing is the basically chief strategy officer, right? So I'm looking at the future, what revenue models our company can deploy, right? What's possible in this AI world, right? And so, I guess invigorates me, right? I love changing technology, right? It's just part of my makeup, right? I get bored very easily, and so this keeps me excited all of the time because there's new things to learn, right? And that's ultimately what drives me. So that's the big role change is I get to focus 100% of my time on innovation, right? What's possible in the future. I get to do a lot of R&D. I get to do global expansion, right? And that's kind of where my chief intelligence officer lives. And I get to just have conversations with clients, prospects, audiences about proper use of secure implementation of AI, right? I think the moniker we came up with these days is we deploy AI solutions securely for companies, right? And because I think it's too much to just say we do AI. What does that mean? Well, you develop the solutions, right? Are you doing like AI, enablement? No, I think it's AI deployment. And I think that's where the MSP, MIP of the future can squarely live in this SMB industry, right? Is we've always dealt with our clients, right? And understand their technology background. Right. And there's a new term in the industry called FDE. It's not new, but it's getting a lot of traction, right? Not only with OpenAI and Anthropic and Microsoft, right? But these are what big firms are doing is they're going, you know what, in order to properly deploy AI in your organization, you need to have what's called a forward deployed engineer. You need to have somebody owning this technology transformation within the existing company. And they need to be resident. They need to be driving that change. Well, who's the FDE for small and medium-sized businesses? That's the MSP, right? That's where you should be living is have that mentality as you need to be alongside that company, as I referenced earlier. You need to be that agent of change and drive this technology forward, right? You really can't do QBRs, right? To me, in order to drive transformation, you have to get real sticky with that client and meet on a regular basis. And that's what I was talking about earlier is it's a different model. And so things are changing significantly in terms of the rhythm, how you meet with clients, how you drive change.
Definitely. And like, what do you think is going to separate the MSPs that continue to grow from the ones that just get stuck?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's pretty much the conversation we just had around AI, and I think that is the big differentiator, man. It's going to be a wedge in our industry, right? And the people that aren't adopting it and learning how to properly service their clients, they're going to get wedged out, right? If you're not having those conversations with clients, regardless of your skill set, regardless of your maturity level, with having AI conversations with clients, every single client of ours and prospect wants to talk about AI, right? I think it's in every industry, it's in every conversation, right? They're getting bombarded with it in their personal lives and in their industry, right? It is the thing to talk about. And if you're still talking about speeds and feeds and cybersecurity,
Yep.
not saying those aren't important,
Yeah.
but you're going to get left behind, right? Because somebody else is going to come in talking about how AI can transform their business. They're going to get their ear, right? And this has happened several times in our industry, but not at this level, right? It happened with printers. It happened with voice over IP systems. Yeah. And for the operators that have been around long enough, they know that those are wedge solutions, right? Another provider can come in. I know early on as an MSP, we were going, we don't do voice, right? I don't want to sell phone systems, Well, what was started happening were voice over IP providers, right? That were phone centric could come in and start to wedge them out of that technology advisor status, right? And again, even printer companies are buying MSPs, and wedging people out, right? So you want to ensure that you're always being viewed as the technology person in the company, right? Like the go-to people, the outsourced CTO, if you will, or, CIO, right? And I think that's the same thing with AI, right? So if you're not the one, if your firm can't do it, partner with a company that can do it, right?
I love that.
Learn how to arm it. Yeah, and I think that's the growth path of the future for everybody, is figuring out where your niche is and creating strategic partnerships to fill those gaps. We've been doing that for years, because ultimately, as you serve bigger and bigger clients, you can't be the expert in everything, right? Within your company and to serve your clients. And it makes more sense to strategically partner with different providers, right? Like, unless you want to be a development firm, you shouldn't be doing dev inside your company, right? Partner with a good dev firm that you can bring in, right?
No, I love that. And I do actually have one final question for you, Allan. This is where I'm going to finish off with. You could sit down with the Allan in 2007, right before launching Agilitech. What's the advice you'd give yourself?
That's a deep question, Kyle. I think looking back over time, I think the biggest thing that changed my trajectory was starting with the end in mind, right? And building out, a life plan, a legacy plan for both personal and professional, and really project there, right? Because I think when I started out, I was just doing work. I was just building a business with no end post, with no goal in mind, right? And I think once I set that goalpost, and it can change over time,
of course,
it changed the way I operated, right? And to think bigger, and to go, okay, if this is what I want out of my life, what do I need to build to get there? And it gave me effectively like a goalpost to go after, right? A roadmap. And that it was probably one of the biggest changes I made in my business and personal life. And I think if I was to tell my younger self is never forget about the personal side, right? The business isn't everything.
Yeah.
And to be well balanced and understand what is your priority, right? And go after that.
I love that. All right. Well, that's amazing. And that's great. You've given out some great wisdom today, Allan. Once again, it's been a pleasure to have you on here today.